everybody. Welcome. This is the Graduate Student Showcase. My name is Andrew Lerner. I am a former graduate student myself, currently an assistant professor at Gyeongnam University. I'll be hosting today, mainly just setting the stage for all of our wonderful presenters to speak about topics that they have prepared and they're eager to share with you. All the presenters today are either current grad students or former grad students who will be presenting about topics that they find interesting or they've done research into during their grad studies. All right, that's really it. So I think we'll just go ahead and begin. When you step up to present, if you don't mind just doing a brief introduction, like Joanne said, talk about who you are, where you're currently at, what school you're studying at, your school affiliation, and your topic of interest. And then just go ahead and do your presentation. After you present, we'll take a few minutes for questions, and then we'll move on to the next presenter. Okay. That said, any questions now? All right. Then Mr. Ihan Kim, would you like to begin?
Sure, yeah. Okay. So I briefly introduce myself. My name is Sihwan, and I studied TESOL for my bachelor and MA, but I changed my major. So now I'm a first year PhD in Learning, Design, and Technology program at the Pennsylvania State University. And my research interests are kind of language learning, but through technology. So it's kind of computer like computer-assisted language learning. And so that's why I chose this topic, Scratch Coding Workshop through design-based research. So actually today I presented a topic at this conference before this presentation. So the topic was how to teach a language through Scratch, like with computational thinking. And I've presented at different conferences, like COTISO or language conferences in different countries, but this is my first time to present kind of research-related topic. Usually I present it for practitioners, like for educators. So I'm a little bit nervous to talk about the research thing, but yeah. And also the main purpose of this presentation is to introduce design-based research. And I want to talk about why I chose this research method. And I didn't have a chance to conduct this research yet. So I will just talk about how I designed this research. Okay. So I'll talk about what's DBR first, design-based research. So I'm not sure everyone is familiar with this research. So design-based research is a genre of research in which the iterative development of solutions to practical and complex educational problems also provides the context for empirical investigation, which yields theoretical understanding that can inform the work of others. So the keyword is iterative, and this research is for solving practical and complex problems, like context-based, like authentic problems, and also it contributes to theoretical understanding. So there are several features of this type of research. First, design-based research has dual goals. So if we have a theory, then we would like to know when and how and why it's effective. It is effective. So once we do this kind of design-based research, then we can find some empirical evidence for theory. And also it's practical because this research aims to solve practical problems. And usually this type of research has intervention to solve problems or changing situations better. And also this type of research has collaboration between researcher and practitioner. So partnership is really important. And unlike other like quantitative research, which are conducted in laboratory, this type of research is conducted in real situation, in an authentic context. And yeah, as he said, it has multiple cycles as iterative feature. So usually it has like 2 or 3 cycles for research. And documentation is really important for this type of research. So other researchers can see what they found in that specific context and why they made the decisions after each cycle. And there are some challenges for this type of research. First, the challenge is, unlike laboratory, it happens in a real classroom. So it considers lots of things. So we can really kind of expect the exact variable, unlike laboratory, because it includes like social context in the real classroom. So it has kind of less rigorous. Instead, it has more kind of richness and it includes like reality. And this type of research doesn't aim to produce like generalization, because it considers local context. So we would like to know what happened in the specific context, the local context. And also it's time consuming because our partnership is really important. So it takes time. And I would like to introduce a model for DBR. Lots of DBR researchers use this type of model. So first, researchers and practitioners analyze practical problems together in that context, and then they look at theoretical theories to find like theoretical framework, and then based on that theories, researchers and practitioners develop solutions together. So for researchers, they usually provide instruments for to solve the problems, and practitioners usually kind of adapt the kind of framework in their context, and they implement that intervention in the context. So they check what worked well and what didn't work. So based on the findings, they come up with new theory, like new framework, and then change the intervention and then try it again. So it's kind of iterative cycles. And once all the cycles are done, then reflect the intervention and then kind of find design principles. So this is kind of an example of how a researcher did the research based on this model. For instance, here, this research team wanted to know the Web 2.0, like how it worked in real context. And so they analyzed the Web 2.0, and then they designed Web 2.0 intervention based on literature reviews. And then they did 3 cycles of interventions and then produce the findings. And so since it has dual goals, like practical and theoretical goal, like researchers usually are in this here: problem, hypothesis, data, and theory. And educators are usually here in this cycle, like problem and design, intervention, and then artifacts. So there are kind of two types of goals happen in the research. So this is an example from a paper. So this part is from educators, the teachers, and this part is from researchers. So researchers wanted to develop kind of theory part and educators who would like to improve their intervention and their teaching in the class. Okay, so this is my design-based research. So the problems that I found is inert knowledge problem. So student can, even though students learn something like grammar or English in class, but they cannot apply because they don't use English in class. And then students also need to learn 21st century skills. There are lots of difficulty of coding problems were reported. Like students feel like coding is really difficult. So I'd like to solve these problems. So the two theoretical framework that I chose is constructionism, which means students learn by doing. So that's why I chose Scratch as an intervention. And also I chose digital storytelling as a pedagogical approach for to solve the difficult part of coding. So I would like to combine like digital storytelling and then the coding at the same time to make the lesson fun. So there are 3 research questions that I thought of. So how does digital storytelling with Scratch influence ESL student language learning, affectivity, and 21st century skills? And what aspects of digital storytelling with Scratch influence ESL student language learning, affectivity, and 21st century skills? And in what ways do ESL students develop their language skills and 21st century skills through digital storytelling activities? So the participants will be 2nd grade ESL students at a North American elementary school. And I will use semi-structured interview with ESL teachers before I conduct this research to figure out the identifying problems. And I also will have interview with students to get their feedback and to check their affectivity. And I will use field notes from observation and reflection from instructors and artifacts created by students to see their coding skills, and video recording of the workshops, pre and post test to check their English development, and attitudinal questionnaire. And one of the methods I would like to use video stimulated recall dialogue. In this dialogue, students will watch the video and then they will recall what they did in the class and then talk about their experience. And this research will have 3 cycles, and 2 cycles will be conducted at the same elementary school, and the last cycle will be another elementary school in the same school district. And each cycle will have 6 sessions, and 3 digital storytelling artifacts using Scratch will be created per cycle. And I prepared an example project, but I'm not sure whether we have enough time to see. Yeah, okay. Just quickly.
Plenty of time, go ahead.
Okay. Okay.
Five little pumpkins sitting on the gate. The first one said, "Oh my, it's getting late." The second one said, "There are witches in the air." The third one said, "But we don't care." The fourth one said, "Let's run and run and run." The fifth one said, "I'm ready for some fun." Then ooh and out went the lights, and the 5 little pumpkins rolled out of sight.
Yeah, so they will create digital storytelling to introduce their culture, like this. Okay, and this is the conjecture map that I created. So student will use Scratch and storytelling. Student will have like storytelling topics and storytelling board. Before they go to Scratch, they will use storytelling board to design what they how they create the story. And then the task will be storytelling and creating scratch projects and then sharing stories to their peers. And yeah, the activities will be group work to create digital storytelling, is pair work, and then active participation. And the activity structure will be sharing ideas and collaborative work. And the process will be the things they will observe in the classes, students' digital storytelling artifacts, and the students' interaction, like how they negotiate the meanings and dissolving disagreements if they have. And the outcomes after this intervention, I expect students' language will be developed, and then they will increase their computational thinking and 21st century skills. Okay, do you have any questions?
Where did you get the idea for doing digital storytelling? It's a really interesting idea for teaching language.
Oh, yeah. So that's a good question. So my academic advisor is interested in coding, like also, I'm not sure whether you know Ozobot or these kind of things. Like, and I kind of thought how I could integrate this kind of little board thing and then the language thing, my language background, language teaching background. So I thought this kind of creating story or even students can create games with Scratch. So like they can write game scenario after creating these kind of things. So I thought maybe I could connect coding skills and this kind of English language learning at the same time.
A good idea. That's tough. Language coding is like a whole other language. I can't even imagine. But that's cool. That's a really good idea. Good.
Can I ask? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No.
Go.
Okay.
Okay, so now no one is asking. I wanted to ask, why did you choose second graders?
Oh, yeah. Because for Scratch, like this kind of digital storytelling, adult learners would feel like it's too childish. But for young learners, like they really love this kind of, cute things like, moving characters, animations. And also, when I reviewed the literatures, I found that if the younger students learn coding skills, the better their skills are. So I wanted to do this kind of research when they're young. So that's why I chose second graders.
Okay, thank you.
I feel like if younger than second graders, maybe it's hard for them, like for kindergartners. So that's why I chose second graders.
So given that they're second graders, that's about what, 8 years old, 7, 8 years old?
Yeah.
And how do you find their tech level, like young kids and the tech, like compared to, say, I'm in Japan at the moment. I'm just thinking of my kids and the technology they have access to compared to maybe what your kids have access to or are used to.
I think it depends on district, and like some schools have more budgets here in the US. So maybe students can access this kind of technology things more than others. And actually, another reason why I chose Scratch for this research is because this kind of abstract concepts can be visual, like. For instance, I'm not sure whether it looks a little difficult, but for other projects, students can see like what happens. So those concepts are pretty abstract, like repetition or like sequence. But they can see blocks, and the advantage of this Scratch is students do not need to type any coding to create code. Yeah.
Okay,
So
yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So actually, this web platform was developed by MIT for young learners to develop their coding skills.
Yeah, so my town in Japan they're literally just starting a program where every student has a Chromebook now. And so there's a long way to go, but knowing that every student has access to the same technology can make something like this a lot easier to implement, because you know everybody's on the same playing field kind of thing. Very cool.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well done. The first is done. Then in that case, how about we move on to our second set of presenters, Gisem and Antonina. Are you ready?
Yes, I am ready, but I hope I won't have any problem sharing my, presentation. Just let me see.
Oh, no worries. Take your time.
Okay, but it doesn't show. I think this is, but it doesn't allow me.
To share the screen?
Antonina, can you share? Because it doesn't allow me right now. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry for this problem.
No
Though we practiced a million times, things happen.
Good. Yep, we can see it.
Yeah. Thank you, Antonina, for saving me.
Okay, now you can see it full screen, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Well, hello everyone.
Greetings from Istanbul.
Today, my colleague and I are going to talk about our study, and we are quite excited. And our study is titled, "Is My Culture There Too? Effects of Turkish EFL Learners' Identities on Their Perceptions of Culture-Themed Lessons."
But first, let us introduce ourselves. My name is Antonina Nemtinova, and I am an EFL teacher with 6 years of experience. I live and work in Istanbul, but I'm originally from Ukraine. And right now, I am an MA ELT student at Bahçeşehir University.
And I'm Gizem Genç. Having completed my BA in ELT, I'm currently doing my MA in English language teaching also. I've been teaching to adults and teenagers, and I'm currently working at a private high school here in Istanbul.
Okay, let's start.
So our study was quite dense because it's about cultural identity. We tried to make it visually appealing as much as we could and simplify. We tried it at least. So our research problem was the EFL course books and materials that we have, which are full of cultural biases and do not include students' own culture. And we wondered that, as suggested in the literature, maybe using students' own culture in the classroom may help them to develop positive identity development and maybe help them to be less inhibited when they're speaking the target language. And in the literature review, as you can see, cultural identity is defined as the relationship between an individual and members of a particular ethnic group who are considered to share a common history and common language, of course, similar ways of understanding the world. As Norton puts, identity is, of course, complex, contradictory, and multifaceted phenomenon, which is dynamic across time and place. And the best thing is, our identity or identities are constructed by the language or the languages that we speak, and in turn, it constructs our identity.
Our view on this question about the cultural identity and its connection to language learning process, we share it with Trofimovic and Turusheva, and they stated that learners' cultural identity and language learning process have a reciprocal relationship, but there are also other researchers who think that learners' cultural identity may inhibit the language learning process, or on the opposite, may have a positive effect on it. We also took two categories from the three major that Cortazzi and Jin mentioned in their 1999 work. The target culture And it was represented by the lesson with Christmas theme and the source culture, which was represented in the lesson of New Year's Eve.
So having said that, we kind of violated some rules because Christmas being a controversial topic here in Turkey to teach teenagers and to adults, we tried our best and it went really smooth. So you can see our research questions. We have 4 research questions here, and the 2 first questions were answered by with the help of quantitative data, and the question 3 and question 4 were answered qualitatively.
Gizem, your part?
Yeah, I work, as I mentioned, I work at a private high school in Istanbul. And for this study, I conducted 2 identically designed lesson plans with my 10th graders, 7 males, 7 females, who are aged between 15 and 16. And according to the assessment test results, their proficiency level ranged between A2 and B1.
I had the same exact lessons and the same exact procedure, but in Foundation University in Istanbul with 8 prep school students. Initially, we started with more of them, but they dropped out during the procedure, and they are aged between 18 and 35, and they have the identical level 2 exams group.
So except one student, all students are Turkish and speak Turkish as their mother tongue. In the procedure that, as we mentioned, we had 2 identical planned lesson plans. The first one based on Christmas and British traditions. The other one, on the other hand, Turkish traditions around New Year's Eve. Both of the lessons were conducted online via Zoom and Percos.
So our research, we chose mixed method design, which was kind of unusual for this kind of research, because normally to research identity, researchers use qualitative designs. But first we anchored our problem, like the first one about their preferences, with quantitative data. For that, we used demographic information form, which consisted of 15 questions, closed and open-ended. We used open-ended there in half of them to give them opportunity to freely express themselves and identify themselves. And also, after each lesson, we gave them lesson feedback questionnaire, which also consisted of 15 5-point Likert scale questions from strongly disagree to strongly agree. So they could assess only materials and the topic, nothing else of the lesson. And then we moved to qualitative data, and we collected it with through semi-structured interviews. We had 9 questions, but we could elaborate on that, add something if we needed to learn some details, or even include to put away some of the questions. And also we used field notes each of us wrote after each lesson that we conducted.
So before moving into, and I don't want to bore you with all the statistical thing, first, as the first step, we computed Pearson, so we first computed Shapiro-Wilk and QQ plots, and data found to be normal. So then we computed paired sample t-test for the both groups. As you can see here, we couldn't find any statistically significant difference between EFL learners' preference towards the teams used in the classroom, which was surprising for us. So in the second slide, you can see the answers, the results of prep schoolers. So as the last step, we computed the Pearson correlation coefficient to see whether there's any correlation between cultural identity and the teams. So the results suggest that learners' cultural identities have no effect on their team preferences whatsoever. So
okay, moving on to qualitative data, we used it to answer 3rd and 4th research questions. After analyzing the interviews, 6 themes appeared, and first set of the themes, target culture, source culture, and intercultural awareness, we can use them to actually analyze and answer the 3rd question. How does the cultural background of the EFL learners form their theme preferences? the fact that students are aware of other cultures and they accept them, perceive them, and actually they are interested in them and want to know more about them, it lets us answer this question that there is no, they don't form any preferences. They are equal towards all the cultures and their home culture, and they are eager to know everything else that is in outside world. And also during the interviews, we stumbled upon three other themes: vocabulary, participation, and experience, which were kind of surprising for us, because during the lessons we could see that students were um, inhibited by something. During the Christmas lesson, they didn't participate as vividly as in New Year's Eve lesson. And then they explained it through the lack of vocabulary and experience. So that actually inhibited the participation. And moving on to the fourth question and the field notes, which actually kind of supported our and also triangulated our data that we got from other sources. So we saw observable attentiveness in the source culture lesson, New Year one, that was close to them and their culture. Also, there was increase in the student talking time in there and intercultural awareness due to middle class privileges. This one helps us to answer fourth question: how does their perceived social economic status affect their participation in the target language community themed lesson? So the fact that they have privileges of internet, video, books, social media, TV series, streaming services, foreign friends, relatives that live abroad. They attend summer schools abroad. They also go to abroad actually, and to English-speaking countries and other countries. They are aware and they know other cultures. They want to get to know them, and that's why actually they would like to participate in this Christmas themed lesson or other culture themed lessons, but they could not because of lack of vocabulary and experience of sharing and experience that they didn't have actually of, for example, celebrating Christmas.
So as every other study, our study also had some limitations, of course. We believe identity being a really complex and, difficult subject, it was quite difficult to study it in a mixed method study. And also we did a small scale classroom-based research. And my colleague and I believe that identity should be studied in a longitudinal study. And, because we worked with teenagers and they're still developing their identities.
And also us being the teachers that conducted the lessons and then the interviews, of course, it might have affected the flow of both, and as well as our perceptions of the results and analysis. We understand that. And if we go to the conclusion part, the current research sheds light especially on the effect of Turkish EFL learners. We understand that it is a narrow topic and a narrow situation that we researched, but we try to do our best. And research reveals some unpredicted causes and results. Actually, we were expecting students to prefer New Year theme, to be honest, but our statistical data showed that there was no preference, and also that it happened in both of two different educational institutions in one city. And these causes can be connected, in our opinion, with the cultural background and identities of learners. And also one of the most important features of this study is in the fact that we give students voice actually, and we ask them what they think and how they perceive this matter.
So we believe that literature and also this study and similar studies may help teachers to include the source culture integrate into their lessons, and maybe students' opinions may help them to design more diverse lessons in culture-wise. So as teachers and aspiring researchers, my colleague and I have learned a lot from this research, and we're still continuing to learn actually. And the first thing that we learned is identity, as we mentioned, it is seen as a controversial topic. And Christmas having a religious dimension, it makes it a controversial topic, but we adults made this decision. So we wondered, maybe students do not necessarily think in the same way as we do. So we saw that students do not have any particular stance towards these topics because they're different generation. And we believe that also identity, being one of the complex and multifaceted areas of research, requires deeper attention and integration into teacher education as well as syllabus.
And of course, including learners' own culture affects students' engagement. Of course, they actually asked us to have more culture-themed lessons, and we can hear them. We can include this and actually create more inclusive classroom, more attentive students, let's say, and more active English. Yes, also student talking time, and create the class that they enjoy and they would like to attend to learn English and learn about the world and how to share their own culture. So here are our references. Thank you very much. If you have any questions,
yeah, we are ready to answer them.
And if you need any other details or maybe something else that we can share with you, shoot us an email. We will be glad to answer you.
Wonderful, thank you. I was curious. Now, your topic is actually very similar to a topic I had researched previously. Do you find that students' interest in foreign cultures, for example, Western culture, might influence their interest in learning the language associated with that culture?
Definitely. Also, we can say that here in Turkey, the stance towards the Western culture is quite positive. Since our students also have this middle class background, as we mentioned, they have access to those areas, and definitely it helps them also appreciate the learning process also. I hope I answered your question.
No, you did. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think Justin has a question.
Hello, can you hear?
Yeah.
Great. I was a little bit curious regarding like the nowadays we tend to kind of say that English is kind of everyone's, and by using cultural events such as Christmas, I worry that it may be reinforcing that English kind of belongs to well, Christian-based countries, let's say, the Kaku's inner circle, let's say, and those places. So if we incorporate a world English as kind of dimension to things, do you think that the students would react as positively if we were to talk, let's say, about some, let's say, a Vietnamese cultural event or something like that?
Definitely. Can I answer this question? Definitely.
Go ahead.
First of all, they use the same English to share their own experience. So it doesn't let them only like perceive information and receive information, but they can share the experience that they have that is, let's say, intimate to them and their culture. And they use the same tool for that. And what we had in interviews, one of my students said that they would love to hear more and have more these kind of cultural lessons. And they actually didn't care that much about what culture that would be. They want to improve themselves as personalities in this globalized world, let's say. So they are looking forward.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Joanne?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your presentation. It was really interesting. I don't know a lot about Turkey, so I'm not sure if maybe you covered this in the beginning in terms of the context. I'm wondering kind of a two-part thing. One, is there, like, how international is Turkey, and is it becoming in terms of having new immigrants and for people for learning English? And then two, what's kind of the government stance in terms of how they are expecting English to be taught? Are they expecting it to be from a very Western ideal? This is Christmas, this is Easter, make sure you're a global citizen in that sense, or is it less imperialistic that they want?
Yeah, I totally understand. To answer your first question, I can say it used to be more international. We had more experts and everything, and it's changing. You can say that. Probably you saw in the headlines of the newspapers. Yeah, it's changing. And the government stands towards teaching. We can say that it's quite instrumental. So that's why maybe the cultural component is not directly integrated into the syllabi in every teaching context. So yeah, I think that would answer your question.
That's why we actually chose this topic, because it's kind of controversial, let's say. So we try to open it up.
Eric? Yeah. Oh, we can't hear you. Can you turn
Okay,
on your microphone?
I'm unmuted. I'm sorry, trying to be polite. I don't know if there's a ton of time and there's a ton of people to talk. My question is sort of twofold. Where are you going to go with publishing, and what is your basis for the qualitative analysis? I mean, did you follow somebody like Sharmaz or somebody?
Actually, we haven't, talked about a lot publishing this research, but we want to. The basis for
local journals, I believe, because we are graduate students in the end.
Yeah. And the basis for the quantitative part that we saw in some studies that they also in one MA, sorry, I cannot remember the name exactly right now, and I think that was done in Iran, and one study that was done in Thailand. So we kind of replicated the process, let's say.
Okay, and then I'll just follow up with you. My favorite person is Sharmaz, Charmaz. So you might check her out. You can find her book as a PDF for free. Shh.
Okay.
And one of the questions I have for you when you go for publication is, how do you get from a list of themes to a model? How do the themes interact? And you didn't answer, and I don't want to ask you that now. I want you to think about it.
Thank you so much, Eric, for the heads up. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
It means a lot.
Wonderful. Let's wrap that up. Thank you so much, both Antonina and Gisèle. That was super interesting.
Thank you for bearing with us.
Oh no, it is absolutely our pleasure. It was really really fun to hear about. Good. Before we move on to the next presentation, I'll take a moment just to, oh, sorry, of course, applause for these two. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Now, before we move on to our next presentation, I'd like to take a moment to just call attention to what are called the, let me double check, what are these called? The virtual display booths. These are available through the site. The virtual display booths are basically resources for teachers and grad students with different materials available that can help you in your teaching or your own research. There's booths for several different programs. There's also a booth for the University of Birmingham, which I should mention is where I graduated from. They have a wonderful online program if you're interested in getting into grad studies while overseas. That said, I do believe we actually have a couple of Birmingham grads in here today as well. Now, oh yeah, there you have it, Michael as well. So excellent. If you have a chance, check out those. Now then, we're going to move on to our next presentation. I believe next up is Matt French. So Mr. French, if you're ready.
Alrighty, so I assume I press this share screen and we'll see how we go. Alrighty, good afternoon. So my name is Matt French, or Matthew French. I'm currently working in Japan, in Hiroshima, Japan, with the Mihara Board of Education. And I'm currently a grad student with the University of Birmingham. Just finished my dissertation. By all accounts, I think I've passed according to the last marks, so we'll see what happens after that. So I'm mainly dealing with junior high school students, so age range about 13 to 15 or 16, I guess, with a few elementary school kids thrown in there as well. So this was one of my module topics about halfway through my graduate, my MA in TESOL, and it was to do with the vocabulary, which I find very interesting. Vocabulary learning seems to have gone a little bit out of favor in the last few years, but it's clearly very important. And so this topic was about mental lexicons and how we form connections in our minds. Obviously, something that's very important. So this was the second language mental lexicons and word associations. And it was a small scale word association task with friends, native speakers, students. So we'll have a bit of a look at that. And at the end, I'm not too sure how many people are currently graduate students, but a few maybe hints and tips, misses that I made that might potentially help you with your graduate studies, or if you haven't done your dissertation yet, maybe some tips and tricks there. So let's just have a look here. So this assignment was based on the book Vocabulary by Michael McCarthy, 1990, Oxford University Press. Highly recommend it. You can generally get it very cheap, a few dollars secondhand. Very easy to read, very interesting book. So what this assignment was looking at was, how can we look at the mental lexicons of our language learners and our students? And Richards and Schmidt give a very brief explanation of what our mental lexicon is. It's the mental store of words, their meanings and associations in our brains. And of course, that's a nice one sentence summary of how we come to understand language. And obviously it's a little more complicated than that. So in the past or currently, we try and ascribe metaphors to these things. It's a network, it's a database that we pull words out of. It's a grid, it's a web, a library catalog. But these are all obviously very simplified attempts to describe a very complicated process, and a complicated process that is in a closed box. We can't see inside people's brains. We can't understand exactly how they're making these connections. All we can do is try and model these things. So the question is, how do we store and retrieve words in our brains? We clearly don't do that alphabetically. When we, make a slip of the tongue, or we're searching for a word in another language, we don't choose words necessarily to the left and right. If you trying to say turn left at the next set of lights, you don't say turn leg at the next set of lights. It generally doesn't work like that. So there's obviously something else going on with these connections. So how can we talk about these connections in our minds? So I guess a good place to start, as any, is to start with some categorizations. And I'll apologize to our non-Australian, British, and Commonwealth countries. I'm using a lot of S's in my words. I'm using a lot of OU, not OR, for my spelling. So a good place to start is with some categorizations such as semantic, encyclopedic, and formal associations. Now, semantic associations can be further broken down into paradigmatic, which tend to be vertical, or I guess categorization often, and syntagmatic, which tend to be horizontal relationships between words, their physical proximity and location to each other. So just going through these a little bit further, we've got synonymy and antonymy. So I'm sure you've all heard of these before. So synonyms being words that are generally very similar to each other, noting that it's very rare for words to have exactly the same meaning. There's usually some slight difference, apart from cultural differences, such as an Australian might say the kitchen tap, where a North American might say the kitchen faucet. In that sense, they are exact words, but that's a cultural difference. Antonyms are generally referred to the oppositeness of words, and you can have ungradable things such as alive or dead. There's generally no in between. You tend to be either alive or dead, or mostly dead. Or things can be gradable opposites. So you could have tiny and huge, and all the different levels in between there. Moving on, hyponymy and co-hyponymy are relational tools. So these talk about the how things are categorized, how they're related to each other. So with hyponymy, we generally talk about hierarchies with general categories at the top, and then types of those subcategories below. So we have a superordinate at the top, the general category, and then subcategories with words on the same level being co-hyponyms. So an example of this might be the superordinate might be vehicle. So that's your general category. And then your subcategory could be cars, motorcycles, trains, planes. And then below that, you've got further subcategories, sedans, SUVs, coupes, hatchbacks. So that's the hyponymy, the vertical relationship. And then across the horizontal, car, motorcycle, train, sedan, SUV, coupe, hatchback, that's your co-hyponyms on the same level. A slightly different kind of relational connection between words is meronymy. And that describes a part-whole relationship. And sometimes this is a little bit more tricky to define. But if we're keeping with the idea of the car, for example, the part-whole would be car, that's the meronym, and then we have wheels, tires, clutch, brakes. They're the parts that make up the idea of the car. So the meronym for cake might be flour, butter, egg, milk. So it's this part-whole relationship. So these are these different ways that words lexically relate to each other. Slightly differently is the syntagmatic attraction between words. And this often comes out with how regularly words are used together. So their actual physical location near each other, but not just how often they appear close to each other or how close they are together, but potentially also the rules for how they don't appear together or shouldn't appear together. So I think it's fair to say that some words have much stronger relationships between than other words. And this is often a very big problem for native speakers. So for example, a low collocation might be great fun. You know, they're two words that go together, but not a super strong connection. Then you start moving into more common relationships like happily married. This is two words that are very often associated with each other. And then you get into fixed phrases such as salt and pepper, fish and chips. There's a fixed order for these things, and it almost never changes. So you would never be asked in Australia, do you want some chips and fish? It's perfectly fine English, but it's just not how we speak. And this can obviously be a problem for non-native speakers who haven't been taught these kind of things and these kind of relationships. So as an example of collocation for the word dog, if we looked up a database, cat is a very strong association with the word dog. You know, and as you move along to the right, there's still a relationship, it just becomes a weaker relationship. Encyclopedic associations are different in that they aren't linguistic or semantic. They're based on our general knowledge and our life experiences. They're often based on feelings, strong memories or events that we have. So for example, the Japanese word, ikiatari batari. This is a very long word. It's a bit of a strange word, and it means hit and miss or loose cannon, someone who's a bit, you're not quite sure what's going to happen. And I learned this because one of my other teacher friends, when we were playing volleyball, he was very hit and miss. I would say 10% of the time he would maybe hit the ball. He was everywhere. It was arms and legs, and you didn't know what was going to happen. Very funny. And all my Japanese friends, ikiatari batari, ikiatari batari. And this association just got lodged in my head. I can't remember nouns that I need to use every day, but I can remember this word. And that's an encyclopedic connection. So we also have these kind of symbolic connections like love and heart. There's no real connection between the concept of love and our physical human heart, but we've made this symbolic connection with our language. So that's a different kind of connection. And lastly, we have formal associations. This is where something like the shape of the word, you look at the word photography and your mind puts in phrenology because they look the same, start with PH, end with Y. So we just kind of make that instant connection. Similarly, phonological, it's based on the sound of the words, bed, head, tight, bite. You make this kind of connection. And lastly, I guess you have random, where there's no immediately obvious connection, at least to the researcher, although there may be some very obvious connection to the person who's responding, but it's not clear why they have said this word. So this is a general overview of the kind of associations for words. So the point of this task, this word association task, was to explore the relationship between this word association and learners' lexical development. So based on their level, are people learning and having different types of connections between their words? So this involved asking a range of learners to record their immediate response to a prompt word. So I'd give out a prompt word. They would write the first English word that came into their head. In this instance, I just chose one word because keep it easier. Other studies have used 2 or 3 words. For the purposes of this study, there was a mix of word classes. So there was nouns, prepositions, adjectives, verbs, and at least one uncommon word that would be well known to people. So even though it was a well-known word, it's not a word you would use very often. So to that end, I chose the following words for a word association task. Hopefully you can see that. Don't worry too much about the reasoning, although I guess you can if you want. But the words I chose were on, big, love, which is a noun or a verb, music, green, mountain, cook, and robot. Now, as it turned out, one of these words was not a good choice, or it's not that it wasn't a good choice, it just gave unexpected results. So those words were on, big, love, music, green, mountain, cook, robot. So what word do you think for non-native speakers in Japan gave results that were not what I as an Australian would expect? I'll let you guys think about that. You can give your answers on a postcard later, and I'll give you the answer. So this task had 51 participants. There was 35 Japanese non-native speakers, 16 native speakers. And there was a mix between junior high school students at one of my schools, Japanese English teachers, and friends of varying abilities. And so the age range was from 14 to 59 years. After I did the test and got the results back, I classified them in terms of, are they paradigmatic, syntagmatic, etc. Keeping in mind that categorization is subjective, and it's sometimes not clear how a response should be categorized. And this is something I'll talk about later in terms of how I could have potentially done this better. The responses by level and classification, and these are percentages, just because there was because of the difference in language levels, the numbers would have been quite strange to look at. But for the most part, native speakers used a lot more paradigmatic responses, with the beginner and elementary students using a lot more encyclopedic responses overall. There was honestly only a few formal or random answers, and to be honest, they were mostly from native speakers, and they're actually mostly from the one guy. So I'm not too sure what was going on in his brain, but he might need some further research to find out why he was giving the responses he was giving. But that was definitely very interesting. In terms of overall word class, definitely native speakers used a lot more adverbs, prepositions. For the most part, nouns responses were fairly even across the different speaker levels, from native speaker to elementary level. Interestingly, a lot of pronouns and verbs from lower level language learners, and that could be because the students were actively studying the language. They were potentially more focused on the actual technical aspects of the language, so that could be potentially one reason there. And having a look at the words, the association responses, we can see there that for the most part, encyclopedic, very high responses across the board, except for the word on, which was probably dealt with a little bit differently by native speakers, being a preposition there. It was really interesting to get my students involved in this as third grade junior high school, because I could give these, this is something I gave just to my students as a, these are the results from what you told me. And I think this was very interesting for them to be part of this experiment and then see the results, and then they could compare their results to the native speakers. So they could say, oh, well, I answered this. What did native speakers answer to this? And I think that gave them a bit of insight into how native and advanced speakers used words or responded to words compared to how they responded to words. So I think, like the previous speakers, getting your students involved, not just in the planning, but in the research, not just to be subjects, but to be part of the research team, quote unquote, really gets them a bit more interested in language learning, I find. Now, so what did this tell me about the mental links between the words they've learned? And were phonological similarities playing an important role? They like this bed, head, light, tight, which tends to happen in lower level learners. Well, the responses were quite varied across the levels, and there was a lot of idiosyncratic responses. But with the lower level learners, the encyclopedic responses were much higher. The hierarchical responses, you know, the categorization, that really wasn't that present. That was maybe a little bit more in native speakers. The non-native speakers tend to focus much more on the encyclopedic responses and connections. So by theme or experience, that was really something that stood out. There were very few formal responses. So bed, head, tight, light. And this has been noted with Japanese and Korean students by Sockman and Harrison there as well. It could be because I made sure to select prompt words that weren't confusing. I don't know if teachers in Korea could confirm, but in Japan, we basically don't teach phonics. And if you're not teaching phonics and the sounds of words, I would imagine you're not going to make so many phonological mistakes, because you're not learning the sounds of words. You're essentially seeing a word and just learning that word each and every time. So that's something that could be an issue there. Was there a shift from syntagmatic to paradigmatic as level increased? So it has been contended that children, native speaking children, tend to respond syntagmatically, while adults tend to use words from the same class, paradigmatic. But to be honest here, there just wasn't enough evidence to confirm that. Results were more in line with other studies that showed there was a dominance of these syntagmatic responses across all levels, with the idea essentially that realistically people reach these different levels at different times. You can't say someone is A1, so therefore they are at this level and they're making these types of connections. And when they get to A2, they will then move to paradigmatic connections. It just doesn't work like that. So I think you would need a lot larger sample sizes and more study to kind of really go down that path. So what does this mean for teaching in Japan, in the classroom? Well, Japanese language learning is very much based on direct translation method. The teacher gives a passage, the students translate the passage, and you know, this vocabulary list, things like that. But there's not so much a focus on making these kind of connections or using techniques such as like guessing and contextual reading or how and when to use your dictionaries. There's really not that much focus on that. So honestly, maybe the use of association building exercises could really help. Vocab hunts, categorization games, dictionary games, things like that to start building these connections. And moving to the next level, once they become a bit more advanced, introducing real world corpora and collocations, and the idea of chunking, these idea of how to create fixed expressions and idioms, which is really where language learning starts taking on that next level. Because as Ellis says, speaking natively is speaking idiomatically, using frequent and familiar collocations, and our kids just don't learn that, and that's how you start to really start to flow and join much more complicated sentences together. So it was a very interesting topic, things that I learned and potentially might help future students. Depending on your research question, more participants is usually better. I had junior high school students and then adults and friends. I really would have liked to get some high school students in there. I really would have liked to get some university students to give that a much more of a broad overview. Pilot test your study or your survey or questions if possible. It can definitely help you avoid results that don't tell you anything. Why are you asking these questions? Are you getting information that's of use? Certainly, if I had pilot tested my word choice, I potentially might have chosen different words just from the responses I would have gotten. And I'll get to that in a minute. As I said, because categorization is very subjective, enlisting the help of some fellow students to essentially provide their own blind categorization and then combining them all to come up with some kind of general agreement as to what a word should be categorized would be very helpful. That is very hard potentially if you're doing your MA online and you don't have contact with other students. I know that's a real problem, and I believe one of the other speakers will be talking about things like that as well. Set up your data early and consistently. When I first started, my data in Excel was a mess, and going back and changing things later can be a real nightmare. And this was a very small study. I'm very glad I did this research topic because it taught me a lot about what not to do, which is very helpful once you get to your dissertation. You don't want to be finding these things out, deep into a dissertation. I would suggest doing as many research projects as you can to learn, because you will make mistakes. So I guess one of my other questions was, which word caused the most issues out of all those wonderful words? Mountain. Because in Japan, there is only one mountain, and it is Mount Fuji. Coming from Australia where there's no mountains, essentially, this didn't register for me. But the idea of Mount Fuji in Japan is so central to the identity of Japanese people that it was ridiculously overrepresented, I would say. But in one sense, that could be seen as bad. Did it tell me something? But yes, it did tell me something. It told me that the people were making these encyclopedic connections. So in one sense, I was initially a bit worried about that, but as I looked more into it, it does actually tell me something. But that is where something like a pre-testing your survey would have brought that to my attention, and at least I would have known about it rather than being suddenly surprised by it. So that was something interesting. And there's some references there. So I've talked a lot, and I've talked probably too quickly, but if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to answer them.
I'll get the ball rolling. That was really good, Matt. Thank you so much. Now, you're, of course, yes, right.
Oh, well,
your research, your WAT test, do you think that'd be applicable and useful with younger students, for example, elementary or possibly even kindergarten?
That's a good question. I chose these words specifically based on vocab lists that my third grade students would know, and so therefore adults should know them. In Japan, they've really started ramping up English in elementary schools. So whereas before it was mainly just games and things like that, Now they've actually got textbooks for grades 3 to 4 and 5 to 6, which certainly wasn't the case. So to be honest, you probably could start doing it by grade 5 or 6 now, I would say. They don't do too much in ways of writing, but they certainly know a lot of words. So yeah, I mean, it could work, yeah.
Thank you. I see a couple hands up. How about Mark? Go ahead.
Hi, I'm also based in Japan.
Hey.
And I was just thinking about your study, and I was thinking, like, is it possibly biased, like, by the materials that the junior high school students are using? I mean, obviously they're very, very Japan-centric materials, to put it lightly. So it's kind of, I guess, hope that the students will learn because they've got the vocabulary there in their immediate environment and stuff like that. And it's not really assumed that students will be using English outside of Japan. It's assumed that they'll be speaking English in Japan to foreigners, this kind of nebulous foreign community. But certainly the vocabulary seems like it's primed that way. And it would be, I think, it could be an interesting future bit of research for you to follow up this. One of my colleagues that I work with did a similar study, and he's also started his MA at Birmingham, but I think he dropped out. Yeah, it could be good to have a look at and investigate the lexical primings just by giving, like, maybe not just a single word, but like a sentence stem or something like that. I think you'd get some really, really interesting data out of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as I said, this was, I chose just the one word, the one response. I kept it relatively simple because this was one of my first research projects. But there's obviously many different ways you could kind of take this and try and find those connections. So I guess it would really depend on what you were trying to find. But yeah, I do find them very interesting because you tend to get very, for lack of a better word, honest reactions. You know, you've got to answer quickly, and so that is the connection that you've made. You don't have too much time to think about it. It's like, no, well, that's either a connection or it's not. And when it just suddenly comes out, you're like, oh, what does that tell you? You know, not getting, you know, Freudian or anything, but it does tell you something when something comes out so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. You might also think about, if you do any further research on this, having a look at the semantic associations, and it's a bit more like neuro-linguistic, but the stuff with the Kutas lab have looked at with event-related potentials, and like kind of just when you give a stimulus of a sentence, but the lexical priming doesn't quite match expectations. Things like that are quite interesting. It could be something that might help inform further research if you look at that.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for that.
No problems.
Nice.
We received a question from Michael, whose mic isn't working. So I'll ask on his behalf. With the native speaker group, did you have any younger native speakers that took the WOT? And were there any differences in their word associations compared to native adult speakers?
I guess the youngest would have been 14, because that was the third grade. Not particularly. Sorry, were they difference in the word associations? I think that the main thing was, I think because they were younger, there was a lot more of these encyclopedic responses. So, for example, the word music, whereas a native speaker might think of you know, art or something like that, you know, maybe more nebulous concepts. Invariably the younger students would give a group name or an artist that they were interested in, and that's just because that's the kind of, I think, as the previous person was saying, they were primed to mention that because maybe a topic they'd studied in their book was what musician or what music do you like, and they answer, you know, here's an artist. So I think the younger students were potentially giving more encyclopedic answers because they just don't have enough breadth of interacting with the language to do that. and that's why I think getting more people into your study would hopefully make that clearer, or give a more clear, shine a light on the fact that hopefully as they are increasing in their language level, they are moving on to those different types of word associations. But yeah, I think the main thing was younger students tended to have these experiential connections rather than these semantic or lexical connections. Yeah. Maturity. That's a very good question. It would be great to try. Admittedly, yes, the native speakers were all at least in the early 20s or older. So it would be good to, an interesting one to compare them to 14-year-old native speakers, perhaps.
I think I saw your hand up earlier. Christian, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I was just wondering, Matt, if you could clarify one part. I wasn't quite sure what you meant when you said the students didn't give formal responses. What did you mean by formal?
Sorry, formal, as one of the slides says, was things that are like, for example, words that look similar to each other, or words that sound similar to each other.
Okay.
So if I said bed and they said head, like that, they just hear a sound and they respond. So I think with potentially different cultures, I honestly don't know about teaching English in Europe, and for example, if there would be more of those kind of responses. But it seems that in at least Japan, Korea, there's less of those because they don't study the sounds of the language so much.
I found for personally with students who go to certain hagwons, like after school classes, they're better at that. Whereas kids who are only in public education, because we really don't do a lot of phonics. Right. And I do sometimes do it, but I'll admit I do make mistakes when teaching it because I am not like a professional of phonics. But yeah, I found older students are slightly better at that, depending on which after like hagwon they go to.
I was honestly expecting more of that. So if I said a word, they would come back with a similar word. But yeah, perhaps that would be more apparent with more people, but it was certainly a lot less than I thought. Cheers.
Thanks.
Well, wonderful. Thank you again, Matt. And
Can I also ask a quick question about the research itself? Matt, did you have or could you predict actually some response, like some group's response based on your teaching and learning experience? And if you had something unexpected, what was the most surprising thing?
Let me just have a look at some of the ones here. I honestly wasn't expecting this. This was also earlier days in my teaching, so I wasn't honestly expecting a lot. I honestly thought there would be more with with both mountain. I honestly thought there would be more nature references, because Japan's very focused on nature and the relationship with nature. And similarly with green, I thought that might have more nature plant responses with kids. But it really didn't. and obviously the mountain one got the Fuji response. I was like, oh yes, of course. As soon as it came in, I was like, oh, why didn't I see that? So yeah, that was a blind spot on my part. But yeah, I think maybe perhaps a green. I expected a bit more. And robot got a lot of interesting responses, like Doraemon, you know, the character Doraemon, the robot cat, very famous in Japan. And there's also another robot, an AI robot that serves you at the local sushi place. And they named him, and I was like, oh, okay, right, yep. Wasn't expecting that, but thank you, great. So yeah, I think with kids, maybe selecting words that maybe it's very hard to predict how they're going to react to these things, which is why you do these tests. Why did you say that? And then they say, oh, no, he's the guy who serves me sushi. You know, okay, that's a good reason.
Okay, thank you very much.
On the topic of robot, I don't suppose you got any responses of Gundam.
I didn't get Gundam. I got Aibo. I got a few Aibos, the Sony robot. Smash Brothers, the Nintendo.
I do like that game too. If you couldn't tell, I'm quite a fan of Gundam. So
Yeah, I saw them at the back there. But I've got bad news. I'm looking at the topics, and there was in fact 0 Gundams.
It's all right. I can see your consistency.
I need to get better students. I'm sorry. I apologize.
It's all good. They just don't know any better, apparently.
Kids, eh? I'll teach them next year.
Thank you. For my sake, that'd be wonderful. Well, thank you again, Matt.
No problem.
Then how about we pop over to our next presenter, Kitri, are you ready?
Hi, yes. Okay. Hello there, everyone. My name is Fitri Gabers. I am from California in the United States, but I have been living in Indonesia for about 10 years now, teaching English here at a variety of places, but I've been at the Korean school here in Indonesia for the past 2 years. So at the school, I've been teaching English and literature to grades 8 to 10. And I'm not really sure how Korean schools work in Korea, but at our school here in Indonesia, the teachers themselves are very involved in developing the curriculum. So that has been really fun and interesting. I'm currently a grad student at University of Birmingham, and I'm getting my master's in applied linguistics. So it's a little bit different than what I'll be talking about today, because in my studies, I'm more focused on discourse analysis, but practically I'm a teacher, a full-time teacher. So this was going to be, I think, an asynchronous video, but I don't think I got it up in time. I'm not sure. So I'm going to share that video here, and then we can do questions and answers at the end. So basically what this is just a really practical walkthrough of a series of 5 lessons that I did with my 9th grade literature class. And because we have whole homerooms, or I teach whole homerooms, the level of the students ranges from almost absolute beginner to advanced, like ready for AP classes. So I really like this because it does allow for people of all abilities to take part and feel like they are able to participate. If you want to see the handouts for this lesson or like the detailed lesson plan, I have included that in the Eventsilla site. So those are available to download there. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and just share my video with you. And when it's over, feel free to ask any questions you may have. All right. Let me just your ekphrastic poetry lesson plan. This lesson plan was originally intended for 9th grade literature, but you can certainly use it for literature classes from probably 8th to 11th grades, depending on how you adjust it, or for any general English class, probably more focused towards the older students in high school, 9th, 10th, and 11th grade. I'm going to go through each lesson. There are a total of 5 in this plan, and we'll just go through them one by one. And then I will let you know what you can do to add to them if you want to extend these lessons, or if you want to contract them, what you can take away. All right, so in the first page, I let you know what materials you will be needing. everything in this lesson is available online. I have included all of the links in the lesson. So when you are teaching, make sure that you have this lesson plan open somewhere in the background so that you can click on the links whenever you need them. I use the arts and culture section of Google quite frequently here. So you will want to make sure to put that in your bookmarks. If you are familiar with it, it has a collection of many museums where you can find a lot of art. I have included links for the Sleeping Gypsy, Still Life with Three Puppies, and the Scream here on this lesson plan, but you can certainly choose any other paintings you want if you have your favorites. I definitely recommend using The Scream by Edward Munch as an example for lesson 3 when you start writing your poems, but we'll get to that soon enough. All right, so those are some paintings that we use in the first lesson, and then the poems that we use in lesson 2 are linked here. So this is just the overview. And again, for this video tutorial, we'll be doing a step-by-step walkthrough of each lesson plan, and I'll be giving you ideas for how to expand or contract your lessons. All right, so for the first lesson, I have the main overview here. Our aim is to get students comfortable using a wide variety of adjectives and descriptive language to discuss visual art. And we'll be focusing more on speaking skills, vocabulary and context, and critical thinking skills. So in the first lesson, you are going to look at some paintings together and ask the students some questions about the paintings. This is to get the students thinking about what kind of adjectives can they use to describe what they see in the painting. So actual observation of just exactly what is in there. And also think about the emotional effects of art. So when they look at a painting, how does that make them feel? What does that inspire in their hearts? Okay, and getting them to talk about these things is the major part of it. So I've linked some paintings here, and the first example is the Sleeping Gypsy. So you'll just look at one of these paintings and ask the students questions about it. So this is the first painting that I chose. I think it's beautiful and I really enjoy it. Lesson 2. In this lesson, you and your students are going to talk about ekphrastic poetry specifically. So you will be looking at specific poems that go together with paintings and talking about why the poet wrote the poem that way and giving them ideas so that they can write their own ekphrastic poems. Again, I've included the links here with the materials. So those include the links to the paintings and the associated poems that are used. The goal of this is that they will be familiar with poetry written about visual art so that they will be able to write their own ekphrastic poems in lessons 3 and 4. All right, so the first painting and poem is Starry Night. Okay, so you will start by looking at the painting itself and having a discussion about it like you did in lesson 1. Okay, and the second part will be to read the poem that is written about the painting. So we can see here a smaller version of Starry Night. I'm sure you're all familiar with this painting by Vincent van Gogh. And The link to the poem is here in the handout as well. So you will take a look at the poem, which we will do now. And after having a discussion about the painting, you can look at the keywords in the poem. Okay, I like to have one of the students read the poem, or I will read it myself, depending on the level of the students. Okay, so we can see this poem is a little bit dark, but Van Gogh was kind of a dark painter, wasn't he? So, the town does not exist except where one black-haired tree slips up like a drowned woman into the hot sky. The town is silent. The night boils with 11 stars. Oh, starry, starry night, this is how I want to die. Wow, that's dark. Okay, so after reading through the entirety of the poem, I would ask the students, okay, where is the town? Do you see a town in this painting? Yes. One black-haired tree. Do you think there's a black-haired tree? If you do, can you circle it on the screen? And have them do that. We would talk about a drowned woman. Do we think we see a drowned woman somewhere in that painting? What about the stars? Are there exactly 11 stars in that painting? Why is this person talking about death? Is there anything in this painting that might make someone think about death or think about the end of their life? So take whatever keywords you find in the painting or in the poem and see if you can connect those to the painting somehow. And just do that together with your class. So you can ask them these specific questions. What's the relationship between the poem and the painting? Is this poem describing the painting itself? Or do you think this poet is in the painting somewhere? Is she in that town? Or do we think this person, this poet, is writing from the perspective of the painter? So we want to get the students to think about the relationship between the poem and the painting and what perspective the poet is taking on the painting. So you'll repeat that for, I would say that you should go over at least 2 paintings and associated poems, although 3 is probably better. And this will take quite some time. It will probably take the whole lesson to talk about the paintings and the poems and their relationship. And this is the last one, which is Nighthawks. And the poem I have put here, okay? So remember, talking to them about what the relationship is between the poem and the painting and who the poet is describing. Is the poet describing the painting itself, or are they taking the perspective of the painter, or are they taking the perspective of what it's like to be in the world that the painting provides? Students will have a lot of different ideas about this, so you can just encourage them to be as creative as possible and imaginative, because that's the point, being imaginative and talking as much as possible. So get those students to talk. Lesson 3 to 5. In these lessons, you are going to be preparing your students to write their own ekphrastic poems. They will be writing them, and then they will be sharing them. All right. So in these lessons, we're hoping that the students will be as creative as possible and that they will really be able to use all of the words that they know that have to do with emotions and feelings and descriptions and everything related to art. Okay, so in lesson 3, you will be working together with the students to write a poem together as a class before splitting them into groups to start working on their own poems. So I do suggest using the Scream for the example poem because I find that it is a painting that students find very easy to relate to, especially these days, because, well, you'll see. If you're not familiar with the Scream, well, I'm sure you're familiar with the Scream. Let's take a look at it. So this is by Edward Munch from 1910. So the first thing that you'll do when getting the students to think about how they want to write a poem about this is to bring up the questions that you brought up in lesson 1. How does this painting make you feel? What does it look like? What do you see? So the questions that you use from the first lesson will be used to create a brainstorm, and the students should brainstorm everything they can about this painting. So you might ask them some of these questions, right? What is the painting of? What do you see? Are there people, animals? So we could say, I see, let's see, there's a man, or maybe some people might think it's a woman. There are boats. She's on a bridge. Okay. And are there any other people in the painting? Well, there were some people walking by, walking away. All right. What do you feel when you look at this painting? I feel scared. I feel anxious. I feel, a lot of people will say, I feel scream. So you could say, okay, she's screaming or he's screaming, yelling. All right. And then you might ask, well, why do you think this person is screaming or yelling? Well, because they're scared, or because they're anxious, or maybe because no one can hear them. Okay, no one can hear. So whatever ideas the students come up with, just write them all down on the screen. In addition to that, you can have students write their ideas on the screen themselves too, with the annotate function in Zoom. When I use that function, I do prefer to hide the names of annotators so that the students don't feel self-conscious about sharing their ideas. That way it won't show which student is writing at what time. So I do recommend doing that. Okay, and step 1 is to have them brainstorm as many words and phrases as possible using the questions from lesson 1. Write all of those ideas on the screen. Make sure you get everything down. Then use those bits and pieces and put them together to make a poem. All right, and that's it. Now you have your poem. So lesson 3 has a handout as well. So once you've done that with the class a couple of times, you can tell students to go to the Google Classroom where they will find this handout, okay? And it will be their job in groups to write a poem about a painting of their choice. So they can go to the Arts and Culture website, and this has many different museums available. So they can choose one of the museums. Let's say that they choose the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Okay. There are many, many, many paintings there. So let's take a look at this painting, perhaps. Okay. So no matter which museum they choose, there will be many paintings in each one, and they can choose any one they like.
and then use that painting to inspire them to write a poem. So they should describe the painting and brainstorm everything that comes up, and then take the words and phrases from the brainstorm to put them together in a poetic way. This is an example of a poem that some students of mine wrote. So these were in teams of 4. You split them into breakout rooms and they will work together. They should put the picture in the document. This team went ahead and included some of the words from their brainstorm. So cafe, night view, terrace of cafe, people wearing colorful clothes, okay? And then the poem here. My first trip to France, a backpacking trip alone. I feel like a bitter cotton candy in a night cafe, espresso that I drink alone. The crowded sounds of people and songs mingling with espresso. My feeling is like a sweet cotton candy. So short and sweet poem, but you know, all things take time. So it's fine if it takes them a whole period to finish a poem. I have another example of a poem that a different group wrote. This one is about the Dolly painting here. And as requested, this group included the link for where they found the painting. And they have a longer poem here. Okay, so some groups' poetry will be longer, some will be shorter. Either is fine as long as they are doing the best they can to express what the painting means to them and says to them.
All right, so one thing that I didn't mention was that some of the more advanced students are familiar with different poetic forms. So sometimes they'll ask like, oh, do you want us to write a sonnet or a haiku? And I just tell them all, it's free verse, just do whatever feels right to you, whatever sounds artistic to you, and you don't have to make it any specific format unless you want to. But that was it. So I hope that was helpful for you. If you needed any ideas for your classes for the semester coming up, I really enjoyed it and I was super impressed by what the students were capable of. So thank you.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Just a general question, what was the overall response from the students to this type of teaching?
They really liked it. I think maybe especially because of the whole situation we're in right now, I think they really enjoyed the opportunity to just talk about how they felt and how some of these paintings are pretty intense. And so it kind of allowed an outlet for that. And after the end of the first semester, I asked the students what their favorite lessons were that we did. And everybody mentioned that they loved doing it and that they wanted to do more in the second semester. So yeah, people were very happy with it.
Wonderful. I think I can do this with my students as well. I'd like to try. Are there any other questions?
Thank you.
Oh, wait, here's one.
Sorry, can I ask one?
Sorry,
I was just wondering, what's the next thing that you think you might try to do after this? Like is there a new area of, I mean, you've been using paintings and poetry. Is there something new that you want to try that you came up with after trying all these things? Does that make sense?
Yeah, after using the painting for poetry, I like to continue with more of the literary terminology. So ideas about with figurative language and imagery. So after doing that, we continued into short stories and we're looking more at the imagery in short stories. So just trying to make a connection between paintings into like literary art forms and then moving from there into short story.
Thanks.
Gisem, you had a question.
Thank you, Fabri. That was lovely to see your students' poem. I have two questions. I mean, the first one is, what was your students' reaction to publishing their own poems, and why did they publish? I think you mentioned, but I must have missed that part. And the second question is, other than the word can't, was there any difference, let's say, in the teams or, you know, words that used between the proficiency levels?
Yeah, so in terms of publishing their poems, basically in the last lesson, I had each group screen share their poem, and then they had to choose one of the group to read it aloud to the class. And they were fine with that, mostly because only one of them had to read the poem aloud. And because the responsibility for the poem was shared in the group, I don't think anybody felt too put on the spot about that. And the second question, now I totally forget what was the second question again?
Other than the word can't, between the advanced level of students and the, you know, lower levels, were there any difference, you know, you could detect?
Absolutely. With the lower level students, it was definitely focused more on, the poems consisted more of exact noun phrases, which were representative of what you could physically see in the painting. So, you know, in terms of the scream, it was like things like screaming on a bridge, just really just what's right there. And then the students who were more advanced got really deep into, that's where the anxiety and all of that was actually what they said to me. And I was like, wow, okay. And things about despair and just, I mean, anything that I think a native speaker might say about abstract ideas that have to do with despair and anxiety, that it was to that level for sure.
Thank you. That was I was expecting to hear.
Sure. Thank you for your question.
And Kirsten, did you have a question?
I was just going to ask Fitri about, were there any problems that you had that you didn't really expect when you were teaching the lessons?
What surprised me most was how well it worked. To be honest, I thought there would be a lot more problems. And in terms of some of the problems that I thought might be the case were that students would not have enough of a vocabulary to be able to make up a poem about the paintings. But when focusing on just the pure observation, that's when I realized that even the lowest level students would be able to make up something, especially because the idea of free verse poetry being so free, you can just put exactly what you see and that's okay too. So it was nice that even the students who are at the lowest levels could feel successful at doing something. I really appreciated that. But yeah, nothing crazy in terms of unexpected problems with it.
When I was seeing it initially, I was like, wow, this is a really hard work. I wonder if it could work with my students in elementary school. But when I saw the poem, I was like, okay, I can see how this all came together. Yeah. Like really impressive stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Any other questions? Well, once again, thank you so much, Fitri. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
All right, and then we'll move on to our final live presentation of the night. This will be, where did my list go? This will be Kirsten. So Miss Kirsten, are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right.
So I'm just gonna go ahead and try and share my screen. Okay, hang on a sec, sorry.
No worries.
There we go. There it is. So, oh, here we go. Yes. I'm just moving out the way. Can you see that okay?
Definitely okay.
Okay, great. So my presentation, I'm gonna keep it a little bit shorter than 20 minutes, I think. So from SOS to Success, the Distance Learner's Dissertation Toolkit. So I've just finished my dissertation stage of my distance learning MA. I'm with the University of Sunderland, and I'm just I'll introduce myself. So I'm all the way from Busan, South Korea. I'm currently an elementary school teacher, but in London, I used to work in the creative industries, and I was a project manager actually for, I think, about 5 years. And I moved to Busan in 2017. So I think yesterday was my 4-year anniversary of living in Busan. And I didn't realize until someone pointed it out. So I have 4 years experience with young EFL learners. This year, I'm glad to be the Busan Gyeongnam chapter secretary for Koti Seoul. And I'm interested in culture in the classroom. So Antonia and was it Gizem? I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm also interested in authenticity, like being an authentic teacher, and also MAL. So MAL is Mobile Assisted Language Learning, which was actually my dissertation. So I'm just going to share a few links with you before I get into the main talk. If I can find the chat again. Oh, here it is. So you'll probably see these links coming up. So the first one, this is a talk I did among with other people, and it's about my dissertation in Malta, Mobile Assisted Learning, Language Learning, if you're interested in that. I also talk about it a bit here. This is a wonderful podcast series by Greg Lewis, and he's with the Yongin chapter, and there are many speakers from the IC on his podcast. They're coming out last week and this week. So if you want to collaborate with him, please get in touch with him. He is really on the ball with that. And finally tonight, the last shameless plug is our social. So after this and after dinner, if you're still awake, wherever you are in the world, please come and join us for some games. So with all further ado, I shall get on with my presentation. Thank you. So here we go. So I want to talk a bit about the problems I had during my dissertation. And I'm going to look at it in 3 sections. So the first one was support. As a distance learner, I didn't really feel like I had anyone to talk to. So I'm going to talk a bit about how you can keep in touch with your cohorts, because I was quite fortunate to have several, fellow students in South Korea. But in our course, which is, I was with the University of Sunderland based in the UK. We had people from all over the world and in different time zones. So that was quite tough. I'm also going to talk about time, like time management. Know yourself, know how you work before you start your thesis section of the course. Look back at what you've done and what your habits are so you can avoid burnout. I'm going to talk a bit about context switching in deep work, and also choosing your priorities, like what's important over what's a priority right now. And finally, I'm going to switch it to here. I'm going to have a look at resources. So writing at MA level, structuring your research, and getting extra help. Okay. Oh, let's go to the next one. So I'll talk about support first. I didn't feel that I was prepared to begin. So I will talk about the solution to this on the next slide, but I really didn't feel at the end of all my modules and the end of the research module that I was really ready to begin the thesis stage. I knew I had gaps in my knowledge, but I didn't know what they were. I didn't feel like I had anyone to talk to, even though I had some colleagues in South Korea who were in elementary school, middle school, and high school. So the teachers like me, they were all doing very different topics. So I didn't really feel like I had anyone who really knew where I was coming from. I wanted to look at mobile devices and Korean students' approaches to independent language learning outside of the classroom. But I didn't really know anyone who had personally, was interested in that area. So I found myself, you know, kind of being in an echo chamber, just talking to myself. I wasn't really confident to ask for guidance to my tutors. And I think a big part of this was myself, like not just not having the confidence. But I didn't really realize it at the time. And when I was thinking of questions to ask them, every time I started writing an email, I just thought, wow, this sounds stupid. Like, who would ask that? Can I really ask these questions? And of course, the answer is yes, you can ask and you should ask. Again, coming back to feeling prepared, I didn't really feel like I had the whole picture. Like, what does what did I really need to be doing and at what time? And I went back to our research module, but I didn't really feel like it painted a full picture. And this might just be because of the way I personally learn. But I just really wanted to see like videos or see someone talking to me about it and be able to listen to it rather than just read through the module books. And the last one, so I actually started my thesis, my dissertation stage before our pandemic situation, but I was already quite burnt out from finishing all the modules and having to do some of the work over our summer vacation, which is very short in South Korea. And obviously we're working full time. And as a distance learner, you have a lot of stuff going on in your life. So you kind of do need to check in with yourself and see, you know, the big picture, not just about your academic progress, but what's going on your life, because all of these things affect you and your ability to work. And you really need to, you know, treat yourself as a human being, not just as a machine, which I think I was not doing very well. So here are some of the solutions I found. With my tutors and supervisors, I finally did reach out to them. And, you know, I don't know why, but I expected them to not be impressed by my questions or not give full answers or just kind of brush over what I wanted to know. But of course, they're professionals and they were incredibly thorough with their answers and detailed. But I still didn't have the confidence to ask everything I wanted to ask. And that's more of a personal thing, I guess. When it came to cohorts, I found a really good way to connect with people was through Facebook. So I started looking for people who had already done my course. And also I started looking for people who were online on places like Discord, also in Reddit. And I tried to find groups that I could join where people were doing their MA thesis. And if I felt like they were having similar problems to me or similar questions to me, I would join groups. And sometimes I'd just be a lurker, but sometimes I would really engage with them. And I found, you know, there are lots of ways to build up a community online, which is not always ideal, but in our situation, like as a distance learner, you know, it opens up a lot of possibilities for us. I was also lucky enough to find some people to mentor me who had previously done the course. So I don't think I mentioned before, but my MA is in TESOL from the University of Sunderland. So I was able to find someone who had graduated 2 years before me. And every time I had questions, you know, I was much more informal. I felt like I could just pop her a Facebook Messenger message and she'd get back to me within a day or two. And it was really nice just to have someone to be able to talk to informally, because when I was talking to my tutors, if it's face-to-face, I feel like you can be more relaxed and, you know, maybe just pop into their office and ask a question. But when it comes to, you know, other people who are maybe, you know, not a professor, it's much easier to be, you know, on a relaxed level with them, a more informal level. And you know that they've recently gone through many of the things that you're going to go through. So that was really interesting. Another really amazing resource I found was like online services. So although I was studying at MA level, I found that this service, PhD proofreaders, they had a lot of materials online. And they also have, which I'll show you later, they have an Instagram account and they have daily emails, which are kind of, you know, focused on your mental health and physical health and just generally, you know, keeping you going, which was really, really lovely. And it's free, you know, to sign up to their email list. And the last thing I think, you know, I want to touch on this a bit is a counseling. If there's things going on your life, it is going to 100% affect the way you work academically. So if there are things going on and it's the right thing for you to do, you know, I really suggest reaching out to people, to professionals, and, you know, it's going to help you tremendously with your academic studies as well, if you're not carrying around all this extra stuff. So I found this quote recently and I absolutely love it because this is me to a T. All of my plans for the future involve me waking up tomorrow with a sudden sense of discipline and adherence to routine that I have never displayed even once in my life. So this is exactly me. I will often plan to do things for the next day or the next week. And do I hit those plans and those targets? No. And then do I start beating myself up about it? Yes. So this is, I think, an important part of getting to know yourself, getting to know how you work. For me, I'm very organized in my day job, but I found that studying for my MA was a completely different thing, and I found it quite challenging. So the things I didn't do, I did not have a dedicated workspace at first. This is really important, and I found out later how actually useful it was. Having a useful to-do list. So this is not just about what you're going to be doing in general, like, oh, I'm going to work on my literature review, but what are you actually going to be doing in the time that you've set aside? Prioritizing my dissertation. So this was like, okay, I know it's important, but I spent a lot of time worrying about what I needed to do rather than actually doing it. And minimizing distractions, I think that goes without saying. So I found I could learn how I worked best. And for everyone, this is completely different. I don't work well in cafes. I mean, now during the pandemic, that's a bit hard to do anyway, but I kept going to cafes because one of my friends was like, it's so easy, you can focus so well with all the background noise. They really enjoyed it. For me, it was not good. Have a plan, as I said. What are you actually going to be doing? You know, are you going to be reading an article and then are you going to be making notes about the article? Are you going to be writing a small section of your conclusion? Be more specific about what you want to do and less general. And choosing your priorities. So this comes down to, for me, what's important and what's urgent. So sometimes, you know, you've got a lot going on in your job, you might have urgent deadlines. So of course you have to focus on them. But I had a lot of work going on, and then an MA itself as well, especially in the dissertation stage, is also a lot of work. So be really specific for each week, each day, what your priorities are, and put off those things that you can put off, because just because it's important doesn't mean you have to do it today. And then understanding context switching and deep work. So the worst thing for me was my mobile phone. What I would do is I would switch it off when I was studying, because otherwise I would be going back to it every 10, 15 minutes, and it was really distracting for me. And also switching off my internet when I could on my laptop, just so I wouldn't go onto YouTube. It's possibly more of a millennial problem, but yeah, it was a big problem for me. And I will talk about this a little bit more in the next section about resources. But these were some really good things that I found online. So I've made a list of 8 things, and I'm just going to read them out. Choose one task to work on. This is when you're writing or researching something. So limit your focus and keep it narrow but strong. I was so good at getting overwhelmed with thinking about all the different sections and how is this going to relate from my literature review to my results or my discussion. But there's a time and a place for that, and it's not at the beginning or the middle, really. I mean, of course, you've got to keep it in mind, but really try to stay focused. I was really bad at that. And I won't say that I've really 100% honed this skill, but it's a really good skill. Just keep working on it. Okay, next one. Okay, this one was interesting and it made me chuckle. Keep the session sacred. So this just means don't take a nap, don't make coffee, don't eat a snack. Do that in your breaks. And once your session has started, keep to your practice. I'm not talking about marathon sessions. I'm talking about short sessions. I started out with 5 and 10 minutes, and I built up to about 30 minutes, and then I would take a 5-minute break. And I wouldn't try and force myself to study hours per day because I found that just burnt me out so quickly. So I would really try to get between 1 and 3 quality hours on a day I had set aside to study, because quality, I think, over quantity is much more important for a distance learner. Maintain your tools. So file organization. I like to print stuff out because I'm a bit old school. I like to write on it. I only print out stuff I think I'll need. Some stuff did get, discarded in later stages when it wasn't directly relevant. If I had 2 screens, I think I would have more just PDF files and be able to, use 2 screens. But because I've only been using 1 screen, I found printouts really helpful. And I would say that going forward, I think if I can make the space, I will get 2 screens because, I want to save some paper. That would be good. Practice. This is so true. Intense work ethic builds over time. It will get easier and your ability to write will improve. Yeah, so as I said earlier, I really built up from quite short periods of time to longer periods of time. I have not been in education as a student for a very long time. Language learning, yes, but it was, I think, over 10 years since I'd really done anything. So it was a huge learning curve at first to remember how to be a student. So this comes back to working in small bits. I used I guess it's the Pomodoro technique, and I found it pretty useful. But as I said before, I built my way up. Work alone, minimize distractions and interruptions. Now, this is not always possible. And for some people, yeah, working in a cafe, with background is fair enough. But for me, I really found I needed to work alone. And I tried to at school during breaks sometimes, pop in and out of my work. But I just felt like I was too on edge and there was too many interruptions, like the phone going. So I didn't really find an office with other people or spaces with other people were effective personally for me. So this is quite important, I think. Make time for recovery. We tend to push ourselves really hard, and I think maybe this last year we've really begun to appreciate how hard and how quickly we can overwork ourselves by we've had to change a lot of our lifestyles and work practices to accommodate the pandemic. And I think it's maybe at the forefront of people's minds as well, of how to spend time with their families. For me, I really ignored exercise. I did focus on my sleep a lot, but I didn't eat so well. So I think these tools towards the end really affected me and affected my output in a way. And, you know, whatever you're doing while you're studying, it's feeding into your daily life, you know, your work life, and that's going to feed back into your academic studies. So it's really good to try and look at your whole life, not just your academic life, I think. And the last thing is practice a compassionate attitude. So this was really hard for me, but I tried to, every time I sat down, to approach my work with curiosity and trying not to be too hard on myself. And if I couldn't do something or achieve something through my writing, I would just try to let it go. But easier said than done. So the last section, I'm just going to have a look at a few resources. So I really felt like I didn't have a robust structure for my research. And I don't think particularly this is a reflection on the course or the university I was at, but I didn't really understand what they were giving me. And it took me chasing down webinars and lectures where someone was actually speaking to me to be able to understand what was required. I really lacked confidence in my writing skills as a result of having not written in English for a very long time. I was very used to, in my undergrad study as a graphic designer, getting a lot of critiques, a lot of evaluations, you know, doing multiple iterations of design projects. And that's just a really natural thing for me. And I didn't really feel like I had much opportunity for that at various stages in my thesis, but that's just my personal experience on my course. And I didn't really know, how can I develop my writing skills? How can I develop my search skills when I feel there's a gap between what I've been given by the university and what I'm expecting myself to do? So these are some of the resources I found. So the tools to help structure my research, they were from these websites. Now, these are focused at PhD level, but I think they're equally relevant for MA courses as well. I looked online for exercises to practice writing skills, like practice writing a little introduction section for something. That was really good. I also looked online for tutors and proofreaders, and I used one. It was a paid service, but I used one tutor to help me get a better understanding of the literature review, of exactly what was required from my subject, which I was looking at MOL. And that was a really useful session. I think I did that in June last year, and that really helped a lot. So I have links to some of the resources I will share in a bit. But before I do that, just remember, if you're in your or approaching your dissertation or in your dissertation, you've got it, don't give up. Make sure you get some humor in your life. These were some of my favorite places on Instagram to get daily doses of humor and keep me going. And there's some really fun things in there. And finally, I think I'll share with you a few of the links. So academically, PhD proofreaders were really good. They've got writing tools for structuring your research, structuring your writing. They've got daily inspiration, tutoring, and support. Some of this is free, some of this is paid. Academictoolkit.com. One of the guy who set this up, he did this lecture that this is a link in the PDF, which is an asset of this talk, how to read journal articles and build models for your research. This was really excellent. So it's through this website, Digital Health, which is, I think, connected with the University of Canberra. And they have lots of webinars, which were really good for me. Well-being, here's an interesting article on context switching and how to stay focused. Emotional burnout, how to recognize the signs. It wasn't until after I finished and I Googled this that I was like, yep, I'm emotionally burnt out. And this is great from the Harvard Business Review. Time management is about more than life hacks. It's about really approaching the way you manage your time holistically. And this is a really good article. So I would recommend reading it, whatever you're doing. So I think that brings us to the end. If you have any questions or want to say hello later, it's my email. You can find me on this Facebook as well, and also over here at Busan Kotisol.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. Those were a lot of useful resources and tips. I could have definitely benefited from this before I did my dissertation.
I'm glad it's helpful. And I'm sure like a lot of that would resonate with some of you who've been doing your masters as well. But I'm sure there's other things that you can add to this, you know. So if there's any tips you can give, please do.
I would like to ask, what are some of your favorite, you mentioned Reddits and Discords, what are some of your more helpful ones that you've been to?
So I changed my phone recently, so I lost a lot of my stuff. So I think on Reddit, I just looked in PhD groups related to language learning, and Discord has been a bit hit and miss for me because I'm a little bit old and it's quite new for me. So I changed my phone and I lost my password, so I had to reset it up. But I will collect some of them together, and I think I'll try and post them in the assets. I didn't have time to do that, but I think there's so many. Okay, another thing we use in Korea is Kakao Talk. I don't know if you're aware of that app. So I found just by searching on Kakao open groups as well for people who were studying in Korea. But I will admit I am a lurker, so I dip in and I stay for a few weeks, and then I usually leave after I've kind of got my emotional boost. That's just my style, I guess.
Oh, good, thank you. Any other questions, anybody?
Just a couple of suggestions.
Oh yeah, questions or comments, suggestions?
Yeah, like there's some great free websites about kind of doing theses, like Thesis Whisperers blog, and the Open Academics website is a thing that's just recently been launched. And I would say as well, like my writing kind of sucked. I've done 2 master's level dissertations now, and Howard Becker's Writing for Social Scientists. It's aimed at sociologists, but it's awesome. It really does streamline your writing, and I think the best bit of advice that I was given was just like kind of don't be afraid to read using a computer, use the search function and get through it quite quickly, and don't feel beholden to reading every sentence of everything. Go broad and then zoom in later and read the things in full that you think you need to read, and that really helped me a lot, took some of the pressure off.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Antonina, did you have a question or comment?
Oh, yes, of course. We are currently MA students with GIZAM. That's why I guess she also has question there. But I wanted to ask you, did you have like these group session lessons kind of before your thesis actually that were preparing you? And could you find, or like, were you able actually to find like some classmates and someone who you could share the situation with? This is how we found each other with GIZAM. She's my classmate actually.
So. Oh, that's amazing. So the only contact, if it hadn't been for the people that were in South Korea, who also lived in Busan and who signed up to the course at the same time for me, the only contact I would have had with other students would be through the online discussions. So every module we had a discussion section, but it wasn't mandatory. And as the modules went on, people participated less and less. Actually, for some modules it was mandatory, but for later it wasn't mandatory. And then by the time we got to the research module, there was a discussion section, but it was like empty. So because of the person who introduced me to the course, I guess I was lucky. I was able to contact them, and they introduced me to other people who had done the course in Japan, in Korea, or people who had moved on as well. And the ones I kind of clicked with on Messenger, I started messaging directly, you know, when I needed assistance. Another place was the Facebook page for our university, for our particular department. When somehow I met some people on there, I don't know, well, we both commented on the same thing, and then we started chatting. and they're actually a bit behind me, but it was good to talk to them sometimes. You know, they're a module behind, so they were struggling through what I'd already been through. So in a way, I became a mentor for them, and then they were giving me like, oh, you know, Kay, Kirsten, you can do it. So that was a kind of a way I found. So I think that's another reason why I didn't really interact too much on the Discord groups or the Reddit groups I found, because I didn't need to. But I think they're potentially a really good place to find people. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, sure. And the follow-up question, like, what was your scientific advisor's role in all this? How did the sessions, or maybe like how did they assess the materials that you send? Or did you have
Sorry, could you repeat that?
What was the role of your scientific advisor in all this? Like these
So I'll be honest, I had very limited contact with my advisors, and the person that was kind of became my mentor, she also had very limited contact. I didn't even end up sending them a draft of my dissertation because I wasn't sure I wasn't sure like what would happen, and they never asked for one. So I guess in my course, they're quite, you know, we were also told we had 9 hours of the tutor's time. And I felt by that stage, I'd already used more than 9 hours. And I knew I could get away with not sending them a draft. So this was why I used a different service, like a proofreading service. And I got feedback on where there was gaps in my explanations, or where things didn't quite make sense. Yeah, I paid for it, but I felt like I've already paid so much from my MA. I really gel with this tutor because I'm paying him directly. He's giving me a lot of attention when I need it. So yeah, I used that method, and I think it's becoming a little bit more common to have those like freelance tutors online. Ideally, in an ideal world, I would have gone to a university where I could get a lot of support. But as well, with the pandemic, you know, in Korea, we've been okay. In the UK, they've been suffering so much. I felt a bit when I emailed one of my tutors that they're dealing with an awful lot at the moment. They're teaching online, you know, as well as their distance learners, they have in-person learners. A lot of students, you know, are struggling through so many different things, like international students with housing, everything. So I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to take a step back. I might not have stepped back so far if it weren't for Corona, I'll be honest. But it is what it is, and it's the way I decided to approach it.
I got it. Thank you very much for sharing your experience.
Gisem, did that answer your question as well? Okay, thank you. Joanne, did you have a question?
Actually, just something else to add. So I've started my PhD, and yeah, it can be really lonely out there. So a couple things is, one, get on academic Twitter. Follow people that are studying and doing things that you're interested in, because then you hear about free resources, you hear about conferences. I mean, you learn so much that way. And then don't be afraid about starting groups yourself. They don't necessarily have to be with people that are in your same program, right? As long as somebody's studying something in terms of applied linguistics or TESOL or something like that, you can get so much from just talking to them to say, oh, really? You're reading that? I didn't know about that resource, right? And particularly when you are talking about your dissertations in terms of like the writing. I mean, I've started 2 PhD groups, where we just talk about corpus linguistics and another one for just discourse analysis. And these are for PhD students, so that we are only talking about our research and there's nothing else. And none of us are at the same university. That's what's really interesting. It's worldwide because it's online. And it's nice to have a group of people that are kind of suffering the same way as you. It's really, yeah. You want somebody else to be like, tell me you've got some agony, tell me that you're not going through this really easily, because am I the only one? Right? It feels good to talk to other people. And then also just because there's so much information, right? It's overwhelming, and you may have one quick question that you can ask and then they can tell you right away. And because you feel so torn down after a while, right? When you're doing your writing and stuff. And it's really nice to be like, oh, I just have this question and I'm a bit afraid to ask somebody. So when you're in one of those groups, it's really easy to be able to ask, and people be like, oh, I don't even know what this is. Let's talk about it. So yeah, and so sorry, I'm taking over your time, but this was a great presentation. I'm really happy that you gave this, because I don't think that people are talking about this enough in terms of how to connect and how to interact with each other and to take advantage of some of the alternative resources that are out there.
I'm so glad it was useful, and thank you for talking about your groups. Joanne, where do you meet with your groups? Is it on Zoom or is it on another platform?
Yeah, no, so for the groups that I do, I have an article coming out on March 15th about how to organize groups.
Excellent.
So the main thing is, one, I hate mailing lists, and I don't have the time to send out emails. So I only advertise on Twitter for my groups, and that's how I found everybody. And so everyone who wants to attend is hungry, in the sense that they're signing up for presentation times, they're writing down their questions ahead of time. We have a shared Google Doc so that the people who are in the groups can see it, they can pre-post their questions, everybody can see them ahead of time. And then the two groups are run differently, actually. For the corpus linguistics group, we pre-write questions, and then I'm the host for the Zoom, and then I post the information. For the other one, everybody signs up, one person per week, and they present about their research. So they can either do a conference presentation to try it, they can take 5 minutes to just, here's what I'm doing, I'm not sure where I'm going, and then other people ask about either theories or methodology or whatever, and then it opens up to a general discussion. And in that case, for that group, whoever is presenting, they're also hosting. So we have a shared Google spreadsheet that we do for that one, so people can post the links and whatnot. So you get practice about hosting a meeting and letting people in and getting more comfortable with the technology and whatnot. So there's a lot of different ways, because then that way also we've got people in China, and Zoom doesn't work well in China, so that they can use whatever's offered by their universities, and you don't have to worry too much about the VPN and whatnot. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to go about it. But I mean, really take advantage of using as much technology as you can. And it ties in nicely with the keynote speaker as well, right? Where he's talking about technology and about being creative and trying to make connection, because it is really hard to make and connect and maintain real connection with people, and this is kind of one way to start doing it.
Thank you, Joanne. I'd like to pop in real quickly. I have time for one last question, and then we're gonna wrap things up. Matt, if you don't mind, could you ask a question?
I guess it was just a very quick statement. Going back to something that was mentioned before, is when you're getting to that dissertation stage, know yourself. I think by the time you've gotten to the dissertation stage, you know where you're weak and what you're not good at, but know that that is who you are and account for that. I know that I will do things a certain way. I know I'll procrastinate doing this, but if you at least know that about yourself, you can somewhat deal with it when you get to that dissertation stage. So hopefully, yeah, by the time you've got to that dissertation, you'll know where you struggle, whether it's being distracted, or you spend too much time reading on this, or you don't go and exercise when you should. So yeah, take care of yourself, and just try and get to know yourself a little bit better, I'd say.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I was really trying to copy other people with my study habits for a long time, especially when I entered into the dissertation stage. And after 6 months, I was just like, this is not working for me. Just because so-and-so said this works for them, and so-and-so said this works for them, doesn't mean I have to do it. Just you should do you know? Yeah. And then, yeah, so it can be really hard to do that. Like, is what I think good enough? Is my ideas about my own stuff good enough? Of course it is. Yeah, you have to have like faith in your instincts and your the way you are. Just accept it. Yeah. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you all so very much. This has been a fantastic evening. I really enjoyed all of these presentations, as I'm sure all of you have as well. It's just been excellent. You guys have done an amazing job preparing, presenting. You take a rest tonight. You have accomplished what you set out to do. Wonderful work all around. Very good.
Much. Yeah.
And thank you, Andrew, for guiding us all along as well.
It's been my pleasure, absolutely.
Definitely, Andrew. Thank you for everything.
I did the least I could do. It's all thanks to you guys, but thank you for your words. There will be a roundtable discussion tomorrow. Any and all are welcome to attend. That'll be from 7 to 8 p.m. Korean time. We will go over topics that we covered today, and we will discuss new topics. We'll talk about what's on your mind, basically. So again, feel free to come.